If there are any more cards, if I could have them. Welcome. Thank you all for coming. This is our first HRC Human Relations Commission meeting for 2018, and we're kicking off the new year in grand style. I appreciate you all being here. I'd like to begin with roll call. Please, Mary.
Commissioner Al-Asani?
Here.
Commissioner Bombach?
Here.
Vice Chair Chen?
Here.
Commissioner Lee?
Here.
Commissioner Onan?
Here.
Chair Stinger?
Here.
Councilmember Wolbach?
Here.
Thank you.
Oral communications. The public is invited to speak on any item that is not on the agenda. And I have two cards. The first is David Callahan.
Thank you, Chair Stinger, Commissioners, and members of the public. I'm David Carnahan in the City Clerk's office, and I'm here tonight to talk about board and commission recruitment. As these folks know, this is a fantastic way to help influence your community and help continue making Palo Alto the great place that it is. The city is currently looking to fill one term on the Historic Resources Board, 3 on the Human Relations Commission, 3 on the Public Art Commission, and 2 on the Utilities Advisory Commission. So even if you don't feel that maybe you necessarily want to fill that role, if you think of a community member that would be a good fit, definitely encourage them to apply. Applications are available on the city's website, cityofpaloalto.org/clerk, and applications are due March 20th. There'll be some flyers in the back for anyone to take, and also Commissioners, your homework is to take the flyer home and encourage at least 2 community members to apply for one of these boards and commissions. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And if we can comment, please consider the HRC with some priority. Cheryl Spencer, please.
Good evening, Human Relations Commissioners and members of the public. I am Cheryl Spencer. I'm a resident of Palo Alto for the past 43 years, and I'm the coordinator of the Disarm Peace Committee of the Palo Alto branch of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which we call WILF for short. Our branch has been working on peace and justice issues for the past 95 years, continually. Not myself, but looking at the mission of the Human Relations Commission, I note it is to promote the just and fair treatment of all people in Palo Alto, particularly our most vulnerable populations. So I think it is appropriate that I address you this evening about the terrible threat of nuclear weapons, which make the whole population of Palo Alto vulnerable to an awful death if a nuclear bomb was set off in our city or even within a few miles of our city. There are over 15,000 nuclear weapons in the world today, owned by 9 nations. About 3,700 of them are deployed, ready to be delivered by the USA and Russia. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, can deliver multiple bombs after traveling through the sky for thousands of miles. The latest Russian Sarmat missile carries 12 bombs, equivalent to 40 megatons, and is reported to be capable of wiping out parts of the Earth the size of Texas or France. That means just one ICBM could wipe out all of Northern California. Such an act is contrary to international law, which says that civilians should not be targeted by weapons during a war, only military combatants. The mission of the international organization called Mayors for Peace is to raise public awareness around the world regarding the need to abolish nuclear weapons, not unilaterally, but as 122 nations who signed the United Nations Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons last July the 7th intend. They intend that every one of the 9 countries owning these awful weapons of mass destruction dismantles them, and the world ends up with none. The members of Mayors for Peace are cities, not just mayors. Currently, it has 7,439 members in 162 countries, including 211 in the US, 32 in California, amongst them Berkeley, Carmel by the Sea, Los Angeles, Santa Cruz, and so on, but not Palo Alto. We belonged from 1985 to 2013, when our then mayor decided, without consulting the city council, to pull us out. So Mayors for Peace organizes a significant grassroots effort to urge governments towards a world free of nuclear weapons. I addressed the city council a couple of times last year about rejoining Mayors for Peace and was not able to get it on their busy agenda. I have been advised that your Human Relations Commission might be able to ask for this topic of returning to Mayors for Peace to be added to a future City Council agenda. Last year's mayor visited 3 of our cities in Europe. I have established that Heidelberg, Germany, where he visited to sign a new sistership, and Enschede in the Netherlands, an existing sister city, are members of Mayors for Peace. Furthermore, the Mexican city of Oaxaca, which has been our sister city for 54 years, and which the mayor visited last October, is also a member of Mayors for Peace. In all, 4 of our 7 sister cities are members of Mayors for Peace, the 4th being Toshira in Japan. I find it a source of embarrassment, and I hope you do too, that these sisters are members of Mayors for Peace and we are not. So I'm asking for your assistance in getting this awful situation of not belonging to Mayors for Peace to get it onto the agenda of the City Council. I have got copies of my speech here which I can leave for you. Thank you. Oh, and there's a lot of people here who agree with me. Hands up.
Thank you, I appreciate that, and I hope you will leave the copies for us. I just want to clarify, and I should have done this before we spoke, that as oral comments are made, we cannot speak to them. We appreciate your being here, and I want to thank you, but I can't address them tonight. We have one more speaker, and that's Roberta Alquist. I thought I would have gone to the next point. Is that what you held that timer to, 3 minutes? Good. I'll ask you to hold it to 3 minutes also.
We have been to the City Council, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, to ask for some kind of protection for renters. This is one of the few cities in the area in which we live where there is no control for rents. We have received numerous complaints from landlords who are increasing the rent up to 300% in 1 year. The Human Relations Commission City Council Resolution 9653 addresses hate crimes, discrimination, assault, and fear. And many of these tenants fear speaking out. So we'd like to ask you to develop a survey, an anonymous survey of the city renters, to find out just how severe this issue is. We receive complaints on a regular basis. In fact, not far from here, 14-unit apartment complex, which had mostly one-bedroom, unfurnished apartments that went 3 years ago for $800 a month are now up to $28.50 a month. All of those tenants who were workers in the city or older people, retired, a woman who was retired with her older mother, for instance, all of them were forced to leave. Many of them had to leave the city. We need some kind of protection for renters. These are discriminatory acts where people can greedily raise rents to the highest market rate. And so if you could consider providing assistance to us to do a citywide survey of anonymously of tenants who are receiving regular and not very regular rent increases, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I see I went out of order. Any agenda changes, requests, deletions? Okay. We'll move on to our agenda. And agenda item 1 is the review and consideration of the ad hoc committee recommendation regarding CEDAW. And as chair, I want to just introduce this item by saying that my goal is to reach an agreement on a motion that balances a workable framework and addresses our priorities as a city for gender equity. Accordingly, as we move through the material that will be presented to us, I will be focusing on a core question, and I'm going to ask the rest of the commission to do so also. And that question is, what is the most efficient process to make meaningful change for women who live and work in Palo Alto? Just for perspective, I'd like to comment that an ad hoc committee of the HRC recommended 7 program and policy areas as an initial response to the Council's resolution for a diverse, supportive, inclusive, and protective community. Gender equity is one of 7 which the HRC is carrying forward and which demand our attention. A policy recommendation under gender equity was to look at an ordinance, step up from a resolution, and assessing the value and implication of that ordinance is our task under this agenda item this evening. Our process will be a presentation by staff, a presentation by Commissioner Lee. Thank you. Oral communications, I have cards. Commissioner questions to staff and/or the committee, and commission deliberation. And then finally, we'll have a motion and deliberation on the motion and a vote. Starting with staff, please.
Thank you, Chair Stinger. So the HRC has a very important recommendation to consider tonight. My staff report was intended to provide some general information about the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW. I want to recognize the hard work of the ad hoc subcommittee on this matter. So that's Commissioner Gordon Gray before she left the committee and moved out of state, and current members, Chair Singer and Commissioner Lee, who have put an enormous amount of work and time into this matter, so thank you. My report was intended to give some basic information about CEDAW for your review, which is what is involved in committing to an ordinance, what other entities which have passed CEDAW have done, and lastly, my analysis. As I stated in my staff report, I am fully in support of gender equity and am pleased that the Human Relations Commission has lifted the matter as a focus on its work plan. After spending much time reviewing the CEDAW framework, I wanted to pass along the following concerns, questions, and comments for your consideration during your deliberation. First is the time commitment. The commitment of the HRC and staff time needed to implement the initial and ongoing work connected to the ordinance are not completely known and look to be quite significant, which could draw HRC and Human Services staff away from other core functions and priorities. The question of an ordinance. An ordinance is essentially a local law. Although it's said to be flexible, the CEDAW framework in its implementation, it is still a local law which the city would be bound to uphold. I believe the work involved in the mechanics of setting up and upholding the ordinance may take time away from other efforts and to make meaningful impact on gender equality. So the task force that is required as far as CDAW. One comment that I included in my staff report that I wanted to include tonight is asked that when the HRC consider the question of a task force mentioned in the ad hoc CDAW committee's report, they have the option of having the task force report to the HRC or to the council. I'm sure there's other options that may be out there, but those were the two that are usually present in this type of a situation. Just wanted the HRC to be aware that if it's a task force that reporting to the HRC, then the HRC would be responsible for overseeing the work of the task force to conduct the gender analysis, analyze the results, and prepare a report and recommendation for council review. I don't want to understate that this would be a huge responsibility that you should consider. The city does not need an ordinance to conduct any type of gender equity study within city operations. You know, when I checked with our Human Resources Office on this matter, they say they do periodic checks into gender-based pay equity in the city and make recommendations for increases when needed. Since the HRC and city staff time is limited, I would like to suggest that the HRC check with members of the public as to what actions on gender equity issues would be most impactful for them. Otherwise, the HRC is making assumptions for actions based on perceptions, perhaps. There can be meaningful avenues for impact short of an ordinance, such as a resolution, or even what the HRC is working on for to hear the concerns of the LGBT community with your listening forum that's coming up in late March. So staff encourages the HRC to discuss and considering the following questions during their deliberations. What are the HRC goals, and I would add the communities, in regards to gender equity, and is CDAW the right mechanism to reach these goals? Does the HRC have the bandwidth to fully commit to the initial and ongoing work associated with CDAW ordinance, as well as other core responsibilities and special projects? And the third is just a question again. If a recommendation on CDAW is forwarded to the council, does the HRC want to recommend that the task force suggested in the ad hoc subcommittee's report to the HRC or not? So that is my report. Again, I want to iterate full appreciation for the subcommittee's work and full support for the matter of gender equality in the community, and look forward to hearing your deliberations.
Thank you. Commissioner Lee?
So before I begin, I just want to thank all of the extraordinary women in this room and on this commission who have worked for so many years on gender equality issues. Many of you have been working on these issues for longer than I've been alive. And so, while I'm putting forth this recommendation, I'm really standing on the shoulders of some extraordinary women and men who have, worked on this issue for quite a long time. And so I'm very privileged to do my small part to further that cause here in Palo Alto. So instead of repeating what's been mentioned in the committee memo, I'm going to confine my presentation to some of the questions raised by staff, and hopefully provide some clarification to my fellow commissioners before we discuss the recommendation in full. Regarding the goals of the recommendation, I think we can all acknowledge that there are gender equality issues in Palo Alto. There are gender equality issues that pervade our community at large. There's no disputing that. You just have to look into the news or your own experiences to know that is an issue. And so I don't think that's anything that we can dispute. What we do need to look into is the extent to which gender equality is a problem in this community and how it manifests itself and what we can do to actually address those issues. And that's precisely what this recommendation seeks to do, is to study how gender equality issues manifest itself in Palo Alto and to have a discussion with the community to identify policies and other initiatives that actually addresses those issues. With regards to the specific mechanism that we proposed, the Cities for CDAW initiative approach is nothing unique. The Cities for CDAW initiative basically recommends that cities conduct a comprehensive analysis of city operations in terms of its role as an employer, its role as a policymaker, its role as a program and service provider in the community, and just analyzes all of its various functions as the city on a comprehensive basis as a way of analyzing the problem and then seeking solutions to those problems. So whether cities for CDAW or CDAW existed, I think any approach to solving gender equality issues would adopt a very similar approach, which is analyzing the problem and then going from there to identify solutions. With regards to the bandwidth question presented by staff, I know this commission has a whole slate of issues that it's very passionate about, and the aim of the recommendation on the table is to really help leverage existing resources so that we can do more with less. By establishing a separate gender equality task force, it will enable us to look at gender equality on a comprehensive basis throughout the city without necessarily tying down the resources or the time of this body, and allows us to leverage the tremendous expertise and passion and experience that we have in this community to help identify solutions to these issues. And so I think, today it's 2018. Women have waited long enough for the city to make this a priority. I think given the current political and social climate, now is the time for us to take a very comprehensive look at how we can address all of these gender equality issues. It may take a little bit more time to do a comprehensive study, but I am firmly convinced that it will lead to more sustainable and systematic reform and change that will impact the women who work for us, who live in this community, and who work in this community in a very profound and significant way that goes beyond some of the prior initiatives that the Commission has taken. I think if we really want to make change in this community, we need to examine what we are doing as a city in terms of all of the different functions that we serve, and use those tools as a way to address these issues in our community in a very comprehensive and deep fashion. And so I look forward to the discussion from my fellow commissioners, and I hope that we can come to a consensus this evening. I just want to make one thing clear. So the recommendation on the table would ask City Council to direct staff to look into drafting an ordinance, which would set up a task force to study these issues. The precise structure and scope of that task force and that gender analysis is to be determined. I think there are certain questions such as staff and budgetary resources which need to be asked of staff, which are beyond the purview of this commission. And so the recommendation on the table is not asking us to pass a set ordinance this evening, but rather asking council to have staff look into it and then come back with an actual recommendation for this body and council to review. And so at that time, we'll have another chance to weigh in and determine, based on the resources available within the city and within the community, what sort of effort can we undertake? And so I hope that this commission will take that in mind, and that this is just one step in a very long process. But there certainly will be plenty of time for us to weigh in and really evaluate whether this is the right approach. And also, I just wanted to mention that while this approach asks for an eventual ordinance, I don't want us to get bogged down by it. There's a way to draft an ordinance in such a way that it would merely set up a task force in the same way that the council might create a new commission charged with studying particular issues within this community. So while it is local law, it can be drafted in such a way that it limits the city's responsibilities, it limits its liability and such. So don't let the fact that it's called an ordinance detract you from authorizing a body of community stakeholders to undertake this important work. So I look forward to having a discussion with you and hearing from the public on this.
Thank you very much. Do I have all the cards? I have 8 cards, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the community. I'm going to ask that each speaker take 2 minutes. And I'll begin with Adrian Murphy, please.
So if you can go there, and as long as the red light is on.
hear you. Good. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So somehow over the last year, while this work has been going on with CEDAW, I was engaged with Greg Sharp and Carla Mata on the same issue around gender equity. We looked at the CEDAW program, and a huge respect to San Francisco, San Jose, Los Angeles for making it work. They each have invested in staff. They get paid by the city in order to make this gender equity a reality. And I'm not sure that Palo Alto can afford that. So when we looked at CEDAW and said maybe that's not the right answer, we went on to EDGE, which is an organization out of Switzerland, which compensates for a lot of the lack of process and lack of resources that cities have when they come to. Sorry, I think I'm nervous because I'm running out of time. I thought I had 5 minutes, so I'm shortening my sentences. This is a really important issue. It's a really important issue for me. It's a really important issue for my son and for my daughter when they grow up. I don't want to wait 2 years for the city to get through an ordinance, to get through a task force, and to go out and do research when there are organizations like EDGE out there that could be folded into this process. So they have an 18-week gender equity study the city can do. It will cost $25,000 and about 3.5 people hours over that 18 weeks from the city. So congratulations for bringing gender equity and CEDAW to Palo Alto, and I hope that as you continue the conversation, you'll think about adding EDGE in as part of your process. Oh, I do? Wow. Okay, so EDGE is actually came out of Davos, and it is the economic dividends for gender equality, and founded by the daughter of Schwab. And what they've done was they brought minds together from all of the gender universities around the world and put together a repeatable process. There are 3 steps in their analysis. The first one is pure gender equity in terms of numbers, but they're not looking at just who's in leadership. They're looking at promotions. They're looking at pay scales. They're also, the second stage is they look at policies. And then the third one is they go out to the community of workers or people who live in the community to find out how do you experience this policy and compared to how the policy is actually written. At the end of that 18-week process, Palo Alto would be given a gender equity seal, which I think would be awesome for the city to be the first one in the United States to say, we're committed, we're doing. And the seal is based not on achieving particular numbers, but on the fact that the city has committed to the process. Now, I think that CEDAW has, I'm done.
Thank you.
Our timer is not very loud, so I might just hold it up when time is up instead of interrupting people, because that doesn't feel nice.
Leah Russin, please.
Good evening. Thanks for having a public forum tonight to talk about this. I very much appreciate the opportunity. I personally am deeply committed to gender equity along with racial equity and the idea that Palo Alto as a city needs to make a priority of supporting those who are inequitably treated and those who have less privilege. To me, there is a huge value in the nomenclature of CEDAW. There is a history of decades of work done by many, many women around the world. And having Palo Alto commit and affirm that work has value. I understand there's a huge commitment of resources. The exact scope of that work that would need to be done to become a CEDAW city seems to me, frankly, an open question. And it also is something probably quite malleable. And the extent to which Palo Alto commits resources is an affirmation of the extent to which we value equity for women. I think that that is something to consider. And I think that we need to reflect on what we want to tell our children about how we chose to spend our money. I understand that we as a city have a lot of needs. We have a lot of things that we want to be and want to do, but equitable should be right at the top of the list. So thank you. You've all received my letter, so I won't repeat those points. But I think the value of standing on the shoulders of CEDAW is something we should not overlook and an opportunity we should not pass up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lisa Ratner, please.
Hi, I'm Lisa Radner from the League of Women Voters. I'd like to read a letter that we have submitted in support of the proposal. The League of Women Voters, at its national, state, and local levels, believes that no person or group should suffer legal, economic, or administrative discrimination, and that due process should be afforded to all persons, including the right to a fair hearing, right to counsel, right of appeal, and right to humane treatment. The League of Women Voters also supports the ratification of the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. In December of 2016, the League of Women Voters of Palo Alto urged the Palo Alto City Council to adopt Resolution number 9653, reaffirming Palo Alto's commitment to a diverse, supportive, inclusive, and protective community, which the City Council did. Accordingly, the League of Women Voters of Palo Alto supports the recommendation to forward to the city the consideration of a local CEDAW ordinance as described in the ad hoc CEDAW committee memo. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Cheryl Spencer, please.
Hello, I'm still Cheryl Spencer. I'm still speaking on behalf of WILF. I first learned about the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women in 1985 at the United Nations Conference at the end of the UN Decade for Women, which I was privileged to attend in Nairobi. And I've been educating the public on and off about it ever since. It has been described as a sort of Bill of Rights for women, in that it quite comprehensively describes the types of discriminations that can be made based on sex or gender and the need to counteract them and provide remedies. Let me read you what part of its Article 1 describes. It says, it describes sex discrimination as distinction, exclusion, or restriction made on the basis of sex, which has the effect or purpose of impairing or nullifying the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise by women of human rights or fundamental freedoms in the political, economic, social, cultural, civil, or any other field. We've been waiting since 1979 for the United States Senate to ratify the UN treaty. It's one of the 5 or 6 countries that have not yet ratified it. So we've decided we're tired of waiting and we want a local effort to make the changes we want in our communities. There's a lot of things in the convention that we can take and customize to what we want to see in Palo Alto, okay? The reality is there is discrimination against women, both individual, systematic, intentional, and unintentional here in the city. The convention also wants to get rid of bigotry in all forms. This is all in my speech I'll give you. So WILF would draw particular attention to the issue of affordable housing and low-income housing in Palo Alto, which impacts women strongly. We want any ordinance that is produced to ensure that women are given equal access to affordable housing. With all this in mind, our branch of WILF passed the following resolution in December. The Palo Alto okay, I've got a copy of the resolution. You will each get a copy of it. Thank you.
Thank you for coming with the copies. Gail Stuckey? I hope I pronounced that correctly.
You did. Okay. My name's Gail Stuckey, and I'm not of an organization. I'm just a 40-year resident in Palo Alto. And I heard about this, and, oh, sorry. I've never done this before. And I'm just a 40-year resident of Palo Alto. And I just think it's important, and I think it's important to be made an ordinance. I'm hearing words that, I guess I'm kind of shocked when I heard, yeah, it's too much time, too much money. We spend a lot of money in this town. I have granddaughters, and all I can say is I can't look them in the face and tell them that a survey on a light pole is more important than gender equity in their lives. And I guess I'm kind of shocked by some of this. I'm mostly shocked by, I'm part of Next Door Neighborhood, and emails going out where a lot of women are saying this is not important. There is no discrimination in Palo Alto. We don't need to talk about it. Women will just call it out. And I didn't even know how to respond to other women thinking that. So I guess I'm here today to encourage you to make this an ordinance, make it important. Because if we don't put ourselves behind it and our money behind it, it won't be important. I mean, as I said, I've been here 40 years. So I guess, thank you.
Thank you. Shelley Kosek, please. I'm not going to speak right now. Okay. Then Mary Jane.
Right. Hi, my name is Mary Jane Marcus, and just wanted to, grew up in Palo Alto, well, kind of in Palo Alto, and moved back in 2003, and went to Palo Alto schools, I guess. And just want to really support the CEDA measure, and in particular, because I've seen in other cities that have implemented this, I think to have someone who represents CEDA with the city, you can contact me. I'm happy to raise money for this position, and a lot of us would help contribute to this, so we can have a part-time person who's really focused on this. And to me, the reason why it's so important, and I'm glad all the people who brought this up, because I'm just showing up tonight, is I think women in Palo Alto are not necessarily thriving right now. It's a really stressful life here in a lot of ways. Financially, and just, it's a very, the tech culture is a very strong male culture, and it's come to dominate Palo Alto, and I think that's had a huge effect on everyone. And so I guess I just urge us to pass this measure and also to start prototyping. Let's benefit from tech. We don't need to study everything for 2 years and not just eliminate discrimination. I worked at Stanford restaurant last year and faced severe sexual harassment there, so I know a lot of restaurant workers face a lot of issues, but also just let's help women harness the amazing energy, just like they give women money in micro enterprise. Like, I think we need to harness the energy of women in Palo Alto to strengthen this community. A lot of us want community space. I'm working on opening a community space, but most of the landlords are male, most of the property owners are male, so we have a historical gender discrimination here that makes it harder for women to contribute. And so I just urge us to work on this, and happy for everyone to be here tonight, and yeah, let me know what I can do to help. So, and you can start by eliminating fees for renting Mitchell Park is just a starting point to make it easier for people just to even gather and organize and build a better Palo Alto. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Roberta Alquist, please.
Well, first, I'd just like to finish her sentence about the resolution for those of you who were not at the council meeting. Wolf proposed a resolution that the Palo Alto Peninsula branch of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom heartily supports the actions of the Palo Alto Human Relations Commission towards the adoption of a CEDAW ordinance in the city of Palo Alto. In particular, Wolf urges the city council to direct the staff to research and draft a CEDAW ordinance for this HRC and city council consideration. And I would like to speak to a couple of points that have yet to be addressed. One is that how many of you know what the disparity is between men and women's pay in this country? Anyone? So, guess?
75%.
It's 82 cents per dollar, and that's gone up in the last 20 years, about 10 cents. 20 years, 10 cents. We live in a very wealthy, predominantly white, male-controlled city. If you look at the demographics of the city, there are a lot of people who just can't afford to live here. Even the people who work in City Hall, including high-paid professionals. I've done a little semi-survey in the building, and they would like to live here, but they can't afford it. Even people making $150,000. So this notion of inclusivity and equity, racial equity, gender equity, is not something new. We want a more multicultural, more multi-ethnic city. We'd like to have the people who work here, like the janitors and the city clerks and whoever else works for the city and in the city, to be able to live here. I would like to know if the city has published the survey on gender equity. I have not seen it. I'm sorry?
Can you come to a conclusion?
Sure, but I would like an answer to that. I have not seen anything that says the city's done any kind of surveys on gender equity. I'd like it to be made available. There's a tenant-landlord mediation board. I'm very familiar with it. The city has it. It has no legal teeth at all. Generally, tenants go and they say, well, it's just a waste of my time. So exposure's the first step. Some kind of legal basis is important.
Yeah, thank you. And our last card is Janet Cook.
I thank you to the commission and to the public. My favorite sign at the Women's March not too long ago was one that said, "I can't believe I'm still marching for these issues." In 1980-ish, I was a leader of the Palo Alto National Organization for Women. We approached Palo Alto for the purpose of dealing with what we call then comparable worth and salaries. We had limited success, but some success. It's past time we took care of this issue, and I thank you for your efforts in that behalf. I speak in support of CEDAW resolution. There are ways to make this financially viable. This is a smart body. This is a smart city. These people out here are smart. That just cannot be the reason this isn't done. Thanks.
I just want to thank each of you for taking the time to come. Some of you to listen, some of you to speak, all of you to speak passionately, factually. It's very thoughtful of you, and I appreciate it, and it reinforces the work that we're doing and that we spend time on. And I don't know I just have to say thank you. This discussion comes back to the commission now. And at this point, we can have questions of clarification to Commissioner Lee or to staff.
Yes, I'm still puzzled about how the task force would work. Someone has to lead it, manage it, develop the report. Who is going to do all that?
So certainly I had notions as to how I would set up the task force, but the committee felt that it would be most appropriate for either this body to weigh in on how they would like to see the task force set up, or to refer that question through council to staff. So I certainly have notions as to how I would set it up, but there are many ways it could be set up. But the idea would be to leverage the tremendous expertise and resources we have in this community. We have so many experts here in this room at Stanford and at nonprofits and at law firms throughout this community. We have one of the highest concentrations of law firms in the Bay Area. As a lawyer, I've already reached out to some of my lawyer friends who specialize in this kind of issue, who are passionate about finding ways for them and their law firms to get involved. And I'm sure that there are student organizations on campus and other groups in the community and individuals who would be more than qualified to help us do that. And so the task force would really help us add to our existing expertise and human power, as I call it, or people power, beyond what the commission itself could do. So certainly, at this point, we are leaving that up to staff as they are drafting something to propose how they would set up that task force.
Commissioner Chen?
Yes, Commissioner Lee, I have this question about what is the actual process, step 1, 2, 3, 4, in your plan to get the work done? And then we could think about resources, and we have people even want to raise money for us. So, that's a good point to start, see how you do it exactly.
Well, so I think the first step is we need to identify the resources that the city has and is willing to dedicate to this effort to do a gender analysis. Once we have identified those resources, or to the extent that council wants to add additional resourcing or staff, from there we can figure out what additional support do we need from the community. And combining both city and community resources, we can figure out what is the scope of work that the task force will do. So at this point, the next step is really an exploratory one, and that's what the recommendation focuses on. It asks council to direct staff to explore this issue more thoroughly as to what resources are available. And once we've identified that question, once we've answered that question, we can determine to what extent can the task force do X, Y, and Z.
So the task force members, how do you draw the task force members? From the city, from the community?
So certainly I have notions as to who I would like to see on the task force, but again, the recommendation is to ask staff to put together its recommendation of who they believe should be on the task force, taking into consideration existing resources and resources we have in the community. But I would envision that it would involve various stakeholders from the community, as well as members from this body.
But my question is, staff in the city, they have their own duties, right? And this is additional duties for them to do. How are you going to generate the funds to support extra staff to do this kind of work?
Well, so that's part of the question that we're asking staff to look at, as to what resources can they dedicate to this? Are there existing resources? Do we need additional resources? And once we've answered that question, then we can narrow down what can we actually do as a gender equality task force. So I think that's certainly the next question that we need to answer. It's not an answer that this body is equipped to handle, and it's one that we need council to direct staff to answer for us.
All right, thank you.
And I should say, when the staff comes back to us and identifies what resources are available, this body, I envision, would have a second opportunity to weigh in as to, is this the right path forward to address gender equality issues? To what extent do we want the task force to do X, Y, and Z? So certainly this body will come back and reevaluate it once staff has examined it further.
I think if that's the direction of the council, that if the council directs the issue back to the HRC, then the HRC would have weigh in on what happens. Then if and when the council deliberates it, it could decide, well, we actually want the task force to report to us. Its first step would be city staff look into this a little bit more and provide us with some options. And as staff, we will certainly work at the direction of council to look into that and to provide the council with a full report of options that they can consider, and then make the policy decision that we as staff would then implement.
Did that really answer your question?
Yes.
Great.
Other questions?
So, yeah,
Please.
I'm still really uncomfortable with the way that the ad hoc committee's report was laid out. It feels to me like we're trying to punt the ball over to council, who I can already tell you, and I mean, I don't know if our liaison wants to jump in here, is way, way, way too busy to take on something like this. They're going to wonder why the HRC isn't doing it and why we're trying to give it to them. And two, staff is super busy and we're understaffed in many departments. They don't have time to take this on either. Three, we're what, $6 million in debt as a city? We don't have any room in the budget right now to do this. So this is all long-term doable, I agree, but in the short term, I already know there isn't the staffing, there isn't the resources, council doesn't want to do it. It's really an HRC issue. If we want to do it, we're going to have to do it, the 7 of us, 3 of whom are terming out, so we're going to have brand new members coming in. They didn't agree to this project. I'm not really seeing realistically how we're going to get this thing off the ground.
To give you sorry, did you want to? To give you an example, in Cincinnati, when they adopted a similar approach, they leveraged $8,000 in city funding and got over $25,000 in-kind contributions from the community to conduct their analysis, and they got other folks in the community to help do the study. And so my initial recommendation really kind of assumed that there weren't any significant city resources to dedicate towards this. And so my initial recommendation tried to take that into consideration and try to leverage, really would depend on our ability to leverage community buy-in and resources. We've kind of modified that to leave that question up to staff and council to decide. If council does find this a priority, which I believe they should, then perhaps they will dedicate resources to it, notwithstanding the other budgetary priorities. But they may find that it's less of a priority and say, these are the resources that we can dedicate towards it, take it or leave it, see what additional support you can get with the community. So I'm very sensitive to that concern, and that's why at this point, instead of presuming one way or the other, I would like council to weigh in on it as to whether they find it a priority and to direct staff to identify resources that we could potentially leverage to do this.
I'd be interested in hearing from our council liaison. You had something to say?
Please.
Thank you for the opportunity to weigh in. So I think that this item will dovetail nicely into the following item on tonight's agenda. And just to go back to or ahead to that one, remember this resolution that we passed in 2016 said the city of Palo Alto will promote actual safety, sense of security, and equal protection for the constitutional and human rights, leading by example through equitable treatment of all by city officials and departments. And also prior to that said that the city will proactively work to ensure the rights and privileges of everyone in Palo Alto, regardless of religion, ancestry, country of birth, immigration status, disability, gender, sexual orientation, or gender identity. So I think that this issue of CEDAW and other opportunities to pursue gender equity in Palo Alto certainly fit within that concept. And although I don't think it was included in your packet, the actual motion from that evening on December 12th, 2016, Part B of the motion was, I think you're familiar with the concept, but I just want to make sure everybody remembers it, was to refer the subject matter of this memorandum to the Human Relations Commission for recommendation of implementation measures and additional elements that should be considered by the council in the future. In other words, how can we make this real through action? And what did we miss or what did we forget? So I think this falls not into a category of something we missed or forgot, because we did mention gender, but it definitely is an example. Should it move forward, it would be an example of HRC fulfilling its obligation under council direction in one piece. I don't think that CEDAW would cover everything that we asked you to look into. It was a very open-ended ask to the HRC that we made in December of 2016, so over a year ago. As one council member, I was hoping to see recommendations sooner than this. So I'm glad that HRC is starting to put together substantive recommendations, whatever decisions you make about which ones to forward to council. I am looking forward to seeing them, and hopefully more than just one. So I think it's absolutely appropriate if the HRC thinks that this is a good recommendation, it is absolutely appropriate to refer it to council as a recommendation, to bring it back to council, because we asked you for recommendations. We asked, what can we do to make this resolution real? CEDAW would be an example, so would EDGE, or perhaps any other mechanism or program that you'd like to recommend. So I don't think it's inappropriate to bring it forward. As far as staffing, cost, those are things that council will have to consider. But if it's the right thing to do in pursuit of something that council has said is a priority for us through our resolution in December 2016, I hope that the HRC won't prevent council the opportunity to hear your recommendations. The balance of what we pay for, what we don't pay for, what we pay for this year, what we pay for next year, do we hire additional staff? Do we turn to the community, as we did with the Children's Museum and Zoo, where the city's putting in $7 million, but the community put in $25 million? All those options are things that the council would have to wrestle with any recommendation. There is always a cost, but I think I hope that the question you're considering is whether it's a good policy for the city to consider, and let us figure out how we're going to pay for it, or whether we want to defer it for a year until we figure out how to pay for it.
And just to address a point that the council member brought up, the establishing a separate gender equality task force would enable us to identify potential policy recommendations or other recommendations for the council's consideration in a more timely manner. Obviously, this body only meets once a month, and gender is one of many issues under our purview. So by establishing a separate gender equality task force composed of people who are, quite honestly, a bit more expertise on this subject matter than we are, we're leveraging the energy in the community to help do our job, to really bring these recommendations to the council in a more timely fashion and a more comprehensive fashion. So while it is a lot of work, I think it helps this body do more in a shorter period of time than we could otherwise do on our own or with only city resources.
I actually have a few questions, if that's okay.
Please, we've spent hours on this, days, and I would like to see more. I can't believe there aren't more questions. So go for it.
Yeah, okay. First, to echo what Commissioner Lee said, thank you all for coming, and for especially a lot of you are part of chapter organizations here that are doing really good, great grassroots work. And again, to echo what Commissioner Lee said, on one hand, we've made a lot of progress on gender equality, but today I saw a picture of a woman who was abused by a senior White House official in the paper, and it's very sobering to show that we have, we're not done. To be clear, my line of questioning is more around clarity aspects, because to be candid, from a process perspective, I felt like I heard conflicting things a little bit. I think Minka raised the concern that an ordinance is a law that binds us to things, but that we don't need an ordinance to do a gender study. I think that's what you said. And then Commissioner Lee said, don't worry that it's an ordinance, that we can still limit our liability and risk for the city. And I guess I don't 100% understand what ordinance means for us exactly in the scope.
Did you want me to address them one by one, or wait for you to go?
Let's start with that one, yeah.
Okay. So there is a certain way that we can draft the ordinance in such a way that it would establish a task force in the same way that the council would establish a new commission, right? It would set up a community body with certain members appointed by whomever, and they are responsible for studying X, Y, Z, right? So that would be city law in the sense that it would be in the municipal code that this body exists, and it has this responsibility to conduct a gender analysis. It is law, but you could have it stop there to say that we set up this body responsible for doing the study, period. You could go a bit further and say, add additional things in there to make it stronger, which I think might concern the staff, but you can stop it there and say, this is what we're doing, and that would be it, right? So really, by us setting up that task force and having them think about these issues, that would be fulfilling the commitment under the law, under this new city law.
So can I just interject? So the job of crafting an ordinance falls to the city attorney. And he or she, whichever attorney works on that, works under the direction of advice or counsel given by the city council as far as when they've deliberated CDAW and in consultation with staff and so forth. So that's really, would not be up to the HRC. Now, if the HRC goes forward with a recommendation for council consideration of an ordinance, I mean, you can add in an addendum to the staff report information of what the HRC thinks to a point, but it really goes to council for that general question, and then the council gives direction to the city attorney to work with staff to study the matter, come up with a draft ordinance, and come back. I would agree with Commissioner Lee that different cities have done this in different ways. Some cities have been extremely prescriptive, and there's a draft CDAW ordinance on the cities for CDAW side which mentions 25 things. The city of Berkeley, theirs reads like, in my perspective, a resolution that is really an ordinance, which it kind of speaks to a point of, like a resolution really speaks to the opinion and the commitments of the city to a certain topic. Theirs really speaks to that and speaks to, the city of Berkeley is committed to XYZ as shown in this city policy. So there is, I would agree with Commissioner Lee, there is some leeway in the matter. There are some ordinances that say the task force goes away in a couple years. So there is leeway, but, the fact of the matter, it is a local law.
What's the difference if we made a recommendation to City Council saying we recommend that you direct staff to have start a community group like similar to the CAC that studies gender equality? What's the difference between that and a formal ordinance?
The ordinance would be the local law. Now, the council could, as it deliberates this, could say, hey, as a first step, could we do this? Include that in a staff report, the findings of that community conversation, include that in a staff report, either by itself, in combination with a draft ordinance for us to consider. All those things could happen. It could be that the task force is set up and it gives recommendations back to council, but it's not under the guise of an ordinance. There's plenty of task forces that the cities set up, the blue ribbon task forces that aren't bounded by an ordinance. That would be up to the HRC to make a recommendation for the council's consideration, for the council to consider, and for staff to implement. So that's really how it works in that effect, but.
And really, the way I see it, there's only an upside to having an ordinance. It solidifies, or it makes it clear that this is a priority for the city. But you can draft it in such a way that it only sets up the body charged with doing X, Y, Z, right? It doesn't force us to do anything beyond that. And I've actually.
I'd ask the commission then to consider if it only sets up the task force, is it really the full intent of the principles of CDAW? Because the principles of CDAW is the hope and to do a whole lot of things. So if, I would just ask you that you consider, that in your deliberations.
Sure.
I think this is an important point because the devil's in the details here. There's going to be all sorts of rules that come with this, is my guess. Like, is the task force going to be public meetings or not? There's going to be, Brown Act or not? Like, I think this is important implications for how this gets done, to be clear.
And that highlights the importance of getting staff to weigh in on it. I was in a position where I could I actually drafted one myself because I'm an attorney and I know how to do that sort of thing. But the consensus of the committee was that we didn't want to prejudge certain aspects of it, and so we wanted to defer to staff to actually come back with something. But certainly the intent of the recommendation on the table is for the HRC to weigh in on any draft ordinance before it gets implemented so that we can look at those details. Yeah, so this recommendation is just asking that we take that next step and study the issue and come back with a proposal that would become an ordinance, should we like it.
Okay. The one issue I had, though, is that, and tell me if I'm wrong, but specifically, the recommendation is that this task force or study, or however the city council recommends that they do it, is actually going to look at specifically, when they say the city of Palo Alto, they actually mean the city government body of Palo Alto. It's not the actual, we're studying the community. Is that accurate to your?
So the focus of the task force would be over areas where we as a city have influence, jurisdiction, powers to affect change. So there are various functions in which I envision that the gender equality task force would look at. Certainly, one would be the city as an employer. You know, we employ hundreds of employees, and certainly we want to be walking the talk, so to speak, in terms of gender equality and how we treat our own employees. But also there's an outward-facing component of the city. We set policies that govern things that go on here. We fund programs and services that thousands of our residents take advantage of and utilize. We have all these social services which try to address certain issues in our community. We certainly, as a city, partner with other government agencies and nonprofits and businesses and individuals. So really what has been laid out in the recommendation, just identifies the different ways that the city right now has an influence or power to affect change. And I think it's drafted in such a way that it's very broad, but it gives the task force authority to look at all of those different areas. And if they discover that maybe the city as an employer is doing really well, maybe they're doing A- work, then maybe they won't focus on that. Maybe they're focused on the services and programs we offer to the community. Or maybe they determine that we need to partner with local businesses more or nonprofits. So it just identifies the different ways that the city interacts with the community and the different tools available to us to affect change.
Yeah. My gut is that like something more community focused is a little more beneficial, because I think that's my guess, to your point, is city government itself is probably.
Yeah.
Deliberation time.
Oh, I apologize. Okay, sorry.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, sorry, and then, sorry, specifically on the ordinance, it's not, we aren't making an ordinance that we recommend that we study with the CDAW framework. It's just to do a study in general and at discretion of council. Is that accurate?
So the CDAW framework, which is pretty loose in itself, recommends that you have an ordinance that does a couple of things. It sets up a task force responsible for doing these things that conducts a gender analysis.
Yeah.
And if so deemed, appropriates funding and staff to do so. So that's the general framework. It's very flexible. It's not necessarily unique to CDAW. If I were going to recommend how we address gender equality issues in Palo Alto, I would recommend that approach regardless of whether CDAW existed, because in order to understand and address a problem, you have to study it first. And I think a separate body with the expertise to do so and the time to do so would be the most appropriate way to do it.
And I would just add that is certainly what CDAW encourages, but there's not a specific oversight body. So our council, if this goes forward to our council can definitely say, yes, those are the 3 areas that we definitely want staff to look into, or that we want, once we have an ordinance, those are the steps we definitely want to take, or could decide on something else. Just wanted
Certainly,
to.
one of the things they could consider is the EDGE proposal. Maybe that's how we do the gender analysis, or maybe.
That's what I was
yeah,
getting
so
at,
that's
is
only,
that help
it could be
and-
weaved into
yeah.
it. CDAW is flexible enough that, that we could do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
So are we wedded to the CDAW framework? I mean, can we do something to advance gender equality outside of CDAW that might be either faster or more efficient or more on point with this community?
So I think this is the right approach in the sense that it takes a comprehensive look at gender equality. It allows us to approach the issue in a more significant and long-term way than this commission might be able to do otherwise by itself. I think, certainly having events that bring awareness to certain issues are fantastic, and trying to educate the community on these issues are great. But there are policies and procedures and programs and funding that have long-term consequences for how gender equality is advanced in our community that I think it's worth us taking a comprehensive look at it. And again, by setting up a separate task force to do it, that frees us up if we wanted to do a chunk of it or a piece of something else. It allows us that flexibility to do it while having this other body who can focus on it in a more comprehensive fashion.
And I would just add, you can certainly do other goals regarding to gender equity that aren't part of the CEDAW framework, but the question on the table today is the CEDAW framework. So.
And I'd like to take a crack at it also. One of the things, this is a continual learning process, and one of the things that was pointed out to me this weekend was that the normal process is a resolution and then an ordinance. And we have been working with the ordinance that the City Council of 2002 passed.
Resolution.
I'm sorry, the resolution. I am getting resolution and ordinance mixed up, and not intentionally. But that ordinance never affirmed, that resolution never confirmed CEDAW values or committed to them. It was a motion to ask that the U.S. Senate take action on the UN convention. And so I think there are, within the CEDAW framework, there is room to commit to CEDAW values. And at least I'd like to explore having the resolution and starting with a task force, and then maybe considering an ordinance subsequently. And that would be something I'd like to explore in the deliberation. But I think your question was, are there frameworks we can look at within CEDAW? And I think there are some important frameworks we can look at within CEDAW. Are there other questions? Can we move on to deliberation? I don't want to walk away from this issue. It is so important to me that we, as a city, make a commitment to gender equity, and that we do it in a way that satisfies all of the issues on the table, because it is going to affect our workload and our thought process and our other commitments in the coming year. I want to ask each of us to comment on the committee's recommendation, the committee's memo, and the comments that you've heard from the in oral comments. I think it's nobody gets a pass tonight. So I do want to keep us moving, and I'm going to suggest that maybe as we go through deliberations, we might be able to stay more focused if we direct our comments to two questions, and that are, what are the most significant actions we can take in this regard, and is a CEDAW ordinance the best mechanism to achieve these goals? And I open it up for deliberation.
I'll start. So I was a very passionate advocate of CEDAW when I first heard about it. I was not familiar until we had a speaker come, I think a year and a half ago. And at that time, we were told that CEDAW was going to be actually pretty easy to implement, that there was a template or sort of a framework that we could follow, et cetera, et cetera. And so many of us jumped on the bandwagon. In the year or so since then, we've had dedicated quite a bit of time as a commission to this issue, and have discovered, in fact, it's not very straightforward. It's not as easy as it was made out to be. It's going to be a big effort, and I think little by little we've gotten a bit discouraged in moving forward, even though I think all of us on the commission are very committed to gender equity. I have a few concerns about process, which I think my colleague, Commissioner Al-Hassani, also raised. We are a commission with a broad charter, and some of the work we do has to do with women who are being abused, beaten, raped, and having other very, very serious issues. And I'd be concerned about spending so much time on this issue that we sort of lost track of what's happening over here to some of our more marginalized sisters in the community because we no longer have any bandwidth to help them. I'm concerned about who's going to manage all of this, and I'm concerned about burdening staff and burdening council. I don't have an image in my mind of exactly how this is going to work, and I believe I'm one of the last, I think you were here on the commission with me, last two commissioners who did the citywide needs assessment about 6 years ago, which was an enormous undertaking that took more than a year to do, and it really does require all hands on deck, and so I'm feeling a little overwhelmed with what CDAW requires. I noticed too in the background information that no city of our size has done it. The smallest city that's comparable to us is Berkeley, and Berkeley is twice as big as we are. So I'm wondering if this is a solution that just doesn't scale to Palo Alto very well, and if rather than wrestling with the CDAW framework, we should be looking at some other way to make a meaningful impact with gender equality. So I'm a little reluctant to support the idea of moving forward with CDAW per se. I'd really like to look at some other options to see if there's a more efficient, more effective way to do this.
So if I could address the, sorry, did you want to?
No, you can address it.
To address the bandwidth issue, I think the recommendation is, in light of the limited time of this body and given our wide mandate, with that in mind, that's why it's important that we establish a separate gender equality task force. And maybe based on what I'm hearing from this commission, it's totally separate from this commission and reports directly to city council. But it would enable the city to address gender equality issues in a comprehensive fashion without tying up the HRC on that issue. We certainly, if there was an aspect of gender equality that we wanted to focus on in any given year, we'd still have that prerogative, but it wouldn't stop a separate task force from doing this very important and very comprehensive work. So from a bandwidth standpoint, that's exactly why this is the right approach, because it wouldn't require this body to totally focus on it 100%. The open question, of course, is how much staff time can we devote to this? How much community time do we need to leverage to do something? And I think that's what we are asking council to direct staff to look into. I am confident that there is enough expertise and people power and time in this community that with a separate task force that they can get this done. Just what I've seen and my sense of the hunger for people to do something on this issue other than just comment on it on Facebook. Right? I truly believe that if we can leverage the resources in the community, we can do more with less from us, from the city, and from this commission.
Well, I do take your point, Commissioner Lee. It's just that I think there's a lot of passion around the issue, and I can see people wanting to come to meetings and share their opinions. But often when it comes down to doing the work over a long period of time, somebody has to develop the survey. Somebody has to figure out how to send out the survey. Somebody has to compile the survey results. Somebody has to write the report. Somebody has to come to council and give the report. You start to see people sort of fall away, right? They're excited up to a point, and then it's like, well, I've got a family, and I've got a job, and I've got things to do. And we've got to make sure that we don't burden council and burden staff and then find out there's nobody running this show. Somebody's got to run the show, and it's going to come back to us. And I think we've got to make sure that we, having made this recommendation, don't let it go off the rails. It's just very, very important. Somebody's got to be in charge, and I'm still not feeling like anybody's in charge.
And that's a fair point. And a lot of the communities who have done CDAW, they've worked with local universities to do a lot of the work. And we are blessed here to have fantastic Stanford University here, and there's other universities in the region who would be willing to step up. I've already reached out to the Women of Stanford Law group, and they are very interested in this, and there are many other women's groups on campus, on and off campus, experts who do this for a living, who do this kind of research for a living. And so I think given that we are so close to a major university that we can find people who are willing to make that commitment. It's not something that can be done overnight, but anything truly worth doing isn't easy, and I don't think we should be daunted by that challenge. We may try and end up failing, but I'd rather us do that than not try at all. And so I'd like to give this community a chance to do it. And, you know, as I mentioned, it's really going to come down to our ability to leverage that community support. And I'm willing to go out on a limb and say that I'm willing to put in the extra effort that is needed to lead, co-lead, you know, bring folks together to get this done. I can't do it alone, but I'm certainly willing to make that extra commitment above and beyond my commitment to the commission.
Yeah. So for,
Yeah, no, I just wanted to address Commissioner Onan's question that Berkeley is twice the size of Palo Alto. But I think if you compare Berkeley and Palo Alto, we have a lot more resources than Berkeley has. Berkeley is not that that rich a city. Plus, as a woman working in Palo Alto, I feel there are issues with gender inequality where if there's a body or a committee at a local level, then women would feel more comfortable going up. I'm visualizing the task force more as a helpline or a social network that people can reach out and talk and bring open their issues. Like somebody said that she faced harassment in a restaurant. I'm thinking if like a woman partner in a law firm faces sexual discrimination, she's going to file a lawsuit in a federal court. She's probably not going to, need support from the city of Palo Alto through this ordinance, but we'll really be helping women at who are marginalized and at that lower income level, who are doing work in the restaurants, who have like a support line, who may not have the means to go file a lawsuit in a federal court. So I think this is very important from that perspective.
okay, so what you just actually makes me even more uncomfortable because in my mind, we are not setting up a support group or an 800 number for people to call. This task force would have no legal enforcement abilities whatsoever. So, I really, really feel like we're starting to drift into the weeds here, and we can't do that. Whatever we recommend has got to be really clear to council and to the community because we're going to have to keep this commitment if we make it. And also, just FYI, when we did the needs assessment across the community, we also had the idea of reaching out to the university because at that time, we had a commissioner who was a retired member of the vice provost's office. Stanford's happy to help if you pay their consultation fee. It was really, really expensive. They're not that invested in Palo Alto. Stanford's its own other world. And that's all the promises that we had from them never came to anything. And it ended up with this commission doing all the work by itself with no budget. So again, just FYI, we've done big projects before. We can do it. But we've really got to think long and hard about it.
I mean, it has to be, we're not setting up another committee to, again, discuss something. Like, we need some meaningful action, and I'm thinking this task force will lead to that meaningful support group or action that connects with people and connects with issues with, women having these issues. So, I mean, that is where it should go. Otherwise, just setting up another body and a committee that's just discussing issues doesn't really, support the women of Palo Alto, right? I mean, eventually that's where you want to get, where you are addressing issues on individual basis, like people, otherwise how can you correct if you don't, know of an individual problem?
My point, but I thought the task force is just a means to getting the needs assessment done, which is part of the requirement to get the CDAW ordinance implemented. Is that not correct? Because the task force doesn't have
There's different ways different cities have done it. So the city of San Jose just passed a CDAW ordinance, and their task force is just going to be operational for 3 years. And they set certain goals that they're going to do for those 3 years. City of Berkeley, their CDAW ordinance, as I said before, it reads more like a resolution. But their task force is basically a commission they already have, the Commission on the Status of Women. So they actually never did a gender equality study. That commission just uses CDAW when there's women's issues going to council to they refer back to the CDAW ordinance to say, council, you have made a certain commitment to women's issues in this, and this area. We're referring back to this ordinance when they would like money or support for a certain item that involves women's issues. So it's all over the map. I have not seen one as the Commissioner Bromblad has suggested, but perhaps the Commission on the Status of Women in Berkeley functions more in that capacity in being able to hear cares and concerns of the residents. So again, this would be something, if this goes forward to the council, you know, the council could really give input on the scope and the breadth of what it would like to see as far as the task force, you know, another commission or whatever, and, you know, appropriate the resources to be able to do so.
Well, I am still worried about logistics, about your process. You know, I totally understand, Commissioner Lee, that you want to start the study, you know, via, you know, council members' recommendation to search, to study whether there are resources, what kind of resources available. So all this information, you know, from this council member will come back to us, to you, subcommittee again, and then it's us to organize the task force, right?
Not specifically.
No?
No, I mean, the task force can be done in certain ways. The HRC could say to the council, we are more than happy. The HRC has the authority to have a task force report to them in the municipal code. So you can technically have a task force that reports to you. 1 to 2 members of the HRC would serve on it. It would be a body that you would help lead the agenda and review the recommendations for. So that's one way of going about it. The other way is the council could have a task force that reports to the council that could do many of the same things. So there is no prescription that it has to report to the HRC. There are different ways of going about it, or the council can say we're more interested in having a, you know, commission on the status of women. So there is ways in which the framework could look different. But if it did report to the HRC, the issues that I brought up earlier as far as scope and oversight and responsibility would fall to the HRC.
Okay, thank you.
And certainly our recommendation could be that council directs staff to draft something and they just bring it back to council for consideration. If this body doesn't have the appetite to do additional review, then we could certainly abdicate that responsibility. I would personally prefer that this body weigh in on any ordinance before it passes. But then beyond that, if we wanted to, we could say, this is exclusively the responsibility of the task force. If they're not able to get their act together, we as a commission are not going to take over those responsibilities. If that addresses Commissioner Anand's concern, we can certainly do that. I had originally anticipated that we would take a bit more ownership over that task force, but that's certainly not something that we have to do. We could just, you know, have it set up as a separate task force, and they will either sink or swim, right?
I'll wait to comment.
Just a couple of thoughts as a council member's perspective on the process. I agree that the devil's in the details, but I don't think that needs to all be worked out here tonight. I agree that the devil's in the details, but I don't think all of that needs to be worked out here tonight by this commission. In fact, I think that the appropriate next step, whatever you decide to recommend to the council, should be to recommend something to council. So that council has the opportunity, after over a year now, to hear your recommendation, consider it, and I think keeping it simple might be best, right? You know, for example, have a recommendation that council direct staff to draft an ordinance, to create a task force that would report to council and or to the HRC on a periodic basis. And if the HRC has a lot on its plate, and given everything else that was just in this one resolution we passed in 2016, I think you do have a lot on your plate. Maybe just have a report directly back to council. And whatever you recommend, we might do something different, right? You might recommend that you have a report back to you, and we might say, you know what, we want to have a report to us on council. You might recommend reports back to council, and council might say, you know what, we're going to give more homework to HRC, and we're going to have a report back to HRC. you're not going to be able to, obviously, you're not going to be able to answer all the questions. We'll tackle it. We'll take our own stab at it, whatever you recommend. I think the interest of the council is in seeing something come forward. And just, I think, going back to the point about staff obligations beyond the HRC's bandwidth, or the staff bandwidth, which I think is very important. It's good that you're keeping that in mind. But again, I'd reiterate that if there is a vision for a policy or program that you think the city should pursue, I'd hope that you'd make that recommendation, maybe acknowledge that additional resources may be required, and then we can take up the question about whether current staffing is sufficient, whether a consultant for a 9-month or 1 year or 2 year period would be necessary to get up to speed, to help run a short-term task force to do a study, whatever, or whether we want to hire additional long-term part-time or full-time staff to support an ongoing effort. And all those questions, council will have to consider in consultation with staff. But until a recommendation comes to council from this body, we're waiting. And we can't have those conversations, council, with each other and with staff, until you send us something.
I'd like to speak to this. I think I've already said I want to have a statement on gender equity. I'm not willing to fail, so I want it to be the right statement, and I also want the HRC involved in that. I don't know if that's a reporting link, but I'm not willing to, or, well, I guess it doesn't matter what the council will decide what I'm willing or not to do, but my hope would be that we would continue to be involved in some way. So what that says to me is that, I think your question, Commissioner Onan, was, can we look at this outside of CEDAW? And my question, I'm going to go back, is can we look at this outside of an ordinance? As I continued to do work this weekend, I looked at Boulder, Colorado, and they started with a request to do an ordinance, and their analysis was that there were too many considerations, and they proceeded with a resolution and some activity so that they would better be able to define their ordinance subsequently. I just don't believe that we have fully exhausted that route. We haven't, as a city, made a commitment to gender equity. And I would like us to do that, to set up the task force and start to define where we want to put our attention. My concern with the ordinance is that it may take us so long to get to the ordinance. I'm not talking about how we're bound to it. It's just getting to the ordinance point, getting it through the city attorney's office, that meaningful endpoints may get lost or delayed. And we could start this if we had a resolution and a committee. We could be going in a couple months to talk to people in the community and define what gender equity means in Palo Alto. And I would like to explore that. I have, I'm going to turn it over to the other commissioners who haven't spoken.
Can I ask just a process question? We have a recommendation in the memo. Do we have to officially vote on that first? And then if it doesn't pass, we can make amendments to it? Or are you allowed to create a motion without having to vote on the recommendation in the memo first?
Can I have a recommendation this time? Just based on what we usually do at council, I think it's up to the chair to decide how to proceed with the meeting. Generally, when a recommendation has come from council members, such as bringing forward a colleague's memo, the chair will usually defer to the lead author of that memo, of that recommendation, to make a recommendation at the meeting, right? So at the meeting, a council member would make a motion to take the written recommendation and put it on the table as a motion, and then if they get a second, then the conversation would proceed. And usually if a memo's been brought forward, the chair would defer to the author or authors of that memo to make that recommendation as a motion.
Thank you. I think we also have a question about the way our agenda item was written. Can we will certainly hear a motion and we can vote up or down on that. Can we take amendments?
I did not hear back from the Attorney's Office. I would maybe defer to Councilmember Wolbach, who had, the question on the table was if the agenda item is specifically on an ordinance related to CDAW, do they have the ability then to recommend a resolution instead?
I am not the city attorney, and that is the kind of question that I would ask them.
Right. And that's my feeling is that would not be possible based on initial staff look at that, but we're awaiting city attorneys. So if it's something, for instance, going forward to council such an ordinance or resolution, I believe an ordinance specifically needed to be an option, or this needed to be more vague. If it's something that the HRC decides itself to do something instead, then you don't need a recommendation to be able to say, hey, let's do these, programs, or hey, let's do this listening session instead. That doesn't need to be on the agenda.
Yeah.
But the question as it's forwarded and as was forwarded by the subcommittee was at this point, and for lack of better phrasing, an up or down on a recommendation of an ordinance on CDAW.
Right. And so not as a legal recommendation, but as a policy recommendation. One, I think just as far as running the meeting, probably want to have somebody, maybe one of the authors, make an actual motion to make this recommendation. That until you've actually said we want to move the recommendation, there is no recommendation to vote on. And then when it comes to what that recommendation might be, we do ordinances on all kinds of things. Some are very comprehensive, some are very simple. We already have had 2 resolutions. We had the resolution in 2016, we had the resolution specifically on CDAW in 2002. I think I'm tipping my hat about how my feelings are about this one. But I don't think it's going to be a quasi-judicial issue when it comes to council, so I don't mind saying that I hope you would move forward with something similar to the written recommendation here. I think council would look forward to it.
And to give the commission some context, I was able to put together my own draft ordinance within a week. And so really, putting together the ordinance is the easy part. The tough part is actually doing the analysis itself. And so I would really implore this body to not get stuck up, that's a bad way of saying, not to be stopped at that first initial point. This is supposed to be the easy part. There are draft ordinances out there on the website that we could easily adopt. We could adopt something that I've drafted. I'm willing to volunteer my legal time to provide that assistance. I know other city attorneys, I know other lawyers who can put in the time to help the city attorney. I'm sure they would need to review it.
But that's still the
Sure, it's the prerogative
of the city
they would
attorney.
need to review it, but if they needed help doing that legwork,
Right.
it would be easier for them to review something as opposed to drafting it from scratch.
I don't believe it's the time as in, it's the time within the other priorities.
Sure.
That usually takes the length of time for the city
Okay.
attorney, not in that the expertise or anything in regards to drafting an ordinance. It also depends on what
Sure.
council asks for, as far as consideration within the bounds of an ordinance. So it's not the expertise, it's, 50 other things that's on the city attorney's plate and that type of prioritization, so.
So at this point, I would move that we make the recommendation in the committee report.
And let's read that for the record.
So the motion would be, the HRC formally recommends that the city council direct staff to study and submit a draft CDOT ordinance for both the HRC's and city council's consideration, which factors in this memo and guidance provided by this body, by the HRC and city council, that does two things. One, affirms the city of Palo Alto's commitment to the principles of the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Discrimination Against Women. And two, establishes a task force that conducts and oversees a gender analysis, comma, establishes the task force's composition, reporting structure, and responsibilities. So that would be the motion on the floor. Again, it's having staff draft something with these things in mind and come back to us for review. So that's the motion I have on the floor.
I support.
I have a motion, I have a second.
Did you want, if she wants to speak to her second?
Yes, that's what I was just
No, I
gonna
just
ask.
wanted to vote, as I didn't realize, like,
No, you just have the opportunity.
You just have the opportunity to speak to your second, as far as process is concerned.
okay, so I support the
Okay.
vote.
Can I ask a question? Okay. About here, you said to study, to direct city staff to study and submit a draft. I thought you mentioned that for the city council, just to, the staff to study whether there's enough resources, but not submit the draft.
Or in drafting a CDOT ordinance, one of the questions that they would consider would be what resources are available. And that,
Within that.
yeah, and that would help them set up, that would help them make a recommendation as to what should be the task force's composition, its structure, and responsibilities.
Okay.
Right, so they would come with a draft ordinance which sets up a task force after they've figured out what resources are available, what they would recommend that
Okay.
they dedicate to it.
Maybe we should probably put that in there, so to clarify the issue.
Yeah. Yep.
Sorry.
I wonder if the words "to study and submit a," whether the words "to study and submit" are necessary. My guess is how this would go is, if the motion passed, your recommendation comes to council in a staff report. In that staff report, staff will have the opportunity to explain to council, here are some of your options, here's how much we envision it might cost, ballpark, based on however much study staff has done by that point. Council can then take up your recommendation as you've recommended it, shoot it down entirely, or alter it in some way. At that point, if we were to approve your recommendation, we would direct staff at that point to go and draft an ordinance. They probably wouldn't draft it before coming to us, unless staff thought it was really easy, in which case they might do a preliminary draft prior to coming to council. But my guess is they would probably wait until they've received council's go-ahead. So I think it's actually a fairly straightforward motion, and I think study and submit probably does no harm, but maybe superfluous words.
Friendly amendment.
I'm not offering amendments nor voting.
Well, so I guess my question is, I mean, to the extent that staff would be willing to answer all of those questions in advance of council directing them to do so, right? This commission doesn't really have the authority to direct staff to do anything, really.
Correct.
Which is why we're asking council to do it.
Correct.
So,
At least in my understanding.
yeah.
But this is your recommendation to council. When council deliberates this, and they come with a recommendation at the end of that, they can certainly direct staff
Yeah.
to do
definitely,
so.
yeah.
So, I mean, I think what Councilmember Wolbach says is you don't specifically have to put it here for council to realize that that's an option, that they should direct staff to do so.
So what would the council member suggest in terms of revising the language in the motion?
Oh, I'm sorry, but wait a minute, we have a motion and a second, don't we have to vote now, and then we can amend it?
You can take a friendly amendment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, I'm not offering amendments. But yeah, I think the process, you have your motion, you have your second, and then you discuss it, and everybody weighs in before you vote, and then once you vote, it's done. So the time to amend it would be in your discussion now. In that first line, the words study and submit. I don't know if they're necessary, but I don't know if they do any harm, so I'm not really offering an
So
amendment.
direct staff to draft a CDAR ordinance?
Yep.
That's fair.
But
Okay.
again, I'm just raising that as a question because I don't feel strongly about it, and again, this is your ball game right now.
Do I have a nod from the rest of the commission to get rid of those words? Does that strengthen things for the commission at all?
Can you read it back to us?
The HRC firmly recommends that the city council direct staff to draft a CDAR ordinance for the HRC and city council's consideration. Everything else remains intact.
Can I offer an additional amendment? I'd like to be less prescriptive in giving it to council, even though obviously technically they can do what they want anyway, but maybe the way I would frame it is for point number 2, I'd like to make point number 2 something more general, in that, like, city council may decide they want to hire a staff member to do this analysis versus a task force, for example. So I'd like to make it broader, rather than establish a task force. Just something along the lines of to have city staff make a recommendation on a feasible way to do a gender analysis, or present, or come back to the city council with some ideas on how to do a gender analysis. Something broader, so that maybe, we may hire consultants, we may hire staff, we may do the task force, but just be less prescriptive about it.
So how about, I would propose changing 2 to authorizes a gender analysis, designates who will conduct and oversee said analysis, and the scope and responsibilities, something to that extent. So,
I think you would need to reread that.
Yeah,
or
yeah, let me-
Once all the corrections are made, staff recommends that you completely reread the recommendation so that the commission knows specifically what it's voting on.
Yeah, but also, should we, to take Councilmember Wolbach's point, should we have an ordinance drafted before we've done the gender analysis? I mean, aren't we supposed to do that first and then have the ordinance? So are 2 and 1 in the wrong
Typically,
order?
you have the ordinance that sets up the body that does the gender
Oh, I see.
analysis.
I see. Okay.
And so in coming back with a draft ordinance, they would tell us who should do the gender analysis, the scope, responsibility, et cetera, right?
Okay,
Is
so
it a
but-
task force, is it a consultant, is it staff?
But then when do we have a CEDAW ordinance itself that states that we have gender equality?
The
We don't.
CEDAW ordinance would set up the body and the
That's- okay,
analysis.
that's-
That's what a CEDAW ordinance is.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
But we do have the commitment as number 1.
Or in this case, you said set up the body, just in keeping with Commissioner Alasani's, it could maybe not set up the body, but set up the goal of
Getting the analysis.
getting the analysis.
So I'm.
I would say just
Yeah.
in the end, I would, that those type of weeds that's really up to the council to direct staff to
The way-
do. But I think just as far as getting clarity, obviously you all need clarity of what specifically is in the recommendations before you can
Exactly.
give
The way this is
input.
written, it's not clear at all. It sounds like the final ordinance is done there, but it's not. It's like preliminary survey and then the work put in. And eventually, we're going to have an ordinance written at the end, but not at this step yet.
No, that's not correct.
Yeah.
That's
Then
not,
it-
you want to,
So this recommendation is asking council to ask staff to come to draft a ordinance which authorizes a gender analysis and designates who does that. We come back with a draft ordinance, they would hopefully pass it, it becomes law. The gender analysis would be authorized, there might be a task force that does it. We do that analysis, we come back with recommendations.
I think it'd be
It's two
clarity,
steps.
the "we," I think may be confusing for folks, as in the designated body.
The designated body, yeah, it could be
Right.
consultants, it could be a task force.
Because in your recommendation, you said the ordinance for the HRC and the city council's consideration. So I think just for complete clarity for everyone here, because is a lot of questions. I just want, like I said, whatever, that there's,
Or so I envision once staff drafts a draft ordinance, it would be referred back to this commission to weigh in upon, and then the council will review it and
that's
or it could, maybe that's the wrong way to do it, but.
What, let's see,
I don't believe that's, I don't believe that that is procedure, that it would come back to the HRC before, and Councilmember Wolbach looks like he wants to weigh in on that, but I believe it would go straight from staff back to the council.
Yeah, as hesitant as I was about a question of changing the language earlier, the words HRCs and, I would recommend that you, as the maker and seconder, remove those, because I think it's time to hand it off to council and staff.
Okay.
And we could
Sure.
refer at some point, some aspect back to the
Okay.
HRC, but I think the HRC has enough on its plate, and
Okay. Fair enough.
it's time for the council and the staff to work out what the ordinance would be or would not be.
Okay.
and directing staff here is the city attorney?
Directing staff, or that would be whatever staff. I don't think I think that would yet to be determined what staff. Definitely, the drafting of the ordinance is the responsibility of the city attorney. If there's any other background information that the city attorney needs, then that would be whatever staff. That could be myself, that could be me in a combination with members of our HR staff. I think that staff is yet to be determined based on what's needed.
Yeah, and sorry to keep chiming in, but yeah, generally when we refer something to staff, it's to the staff that reports to us. That's the city manager
Who
and the city
directs us
attorney,
to do it.
and occasionally city clerk or the city auditor. So anyone under the city attorneys or the city manager's chain of command, which includes Minka,
Yes.
could be tapped into if the city manager, delegates them that responsibility. But it could also be that the city manager and city attorney bring in outside counsel or outside consultants to help with any aspect of anything we've directed. So we usually don't, we actually don't stipulate and shouldn't stipulate as council which members of staff work on something.
Right.
That's not our.
Just the council
That's,
appointed
we don't like to
officers.
micromanage like that.
My only reason for asking the question was, we are asking for a draft CEDAW ordinance, and we were told not, as a commission, not to have a draft ordinance, and I was reading this differently. For me, the important words are, the HRC formally recommends that the city council affirm the city of Palo Alto's commitment to the principles of the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Discrimination Against Women, and establishes a task force that conducts or oversees gender analysis, the compositions, reporting structure, and responsibilities. I think that's really, you've captured, or we've captured.
Yeah, we amended that point. I suggested an amendment for point number 2 that I thought.
I have to, at a certain point, we're just
Yeah.
gonna need to
So-
have Commissioner
yeah.
Lee reread it
Yeah.
to see if it specifically
So let-
addresses the
yeah.
points of concern that have come up.
So let
And
me.
the maker and the I think
Yes.
if the chair would have to enforce this, I think, but the maker and the seconder would need to accept the
All the
amendments.
changes.
So let me
Both.
propose the following. The HRC formally recommends that the city council direct staff to draft a CEDAW ordinance for the city council's consideration, which factors in this memo and guidance provided by the HRC and city council, that, 1, affirms the city of Palo Alto's commitment to the principles of the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Discrimination Against Women, and 2, authorizes a gender analysis and designates a body for conducting and overseeing the analysis and its powers, scope, and responsibilities. Do you second that recommendation?
I can start. I can
Okay.
second.
Okay.
discussion on it?
Yes, sorry.
I don't understand though, which factors in
Yeah,
this
yeah,
memo
yeah.
and guidance
You
part?
probably can take
Doesn't
that
make
out.
any sense.
You can probably take it out. I don't think it's needed.
Well, so the idea would be that in drafting the ordinance, they would take into well, I mean, they probably do this already, take into consideration the things that we've listed in the memo, any discussion we've had here, and any discussion that council has. So we're providing a little bit of guidance, but certainly staff has discretion to draft it as they see fit.
Well, I think,
That's all it's
I
saying.
think a compilation of this conversation would be included in the staff's report, as well as the verbatim minutes of this meeting. So,
So let me revise it then to make it clearer. I mean, this is what I do for a living, so let me change it, make it simpler, as opposed to. The HRC formally recommends that the City Council direct staff to draft a CDOT ordinance for the City Council's consideration that, 1, affirms the City of Palo Alto's commitment to the principles of CDOT, and 2, authorizes a gender analysis and designates a body to conduct and oversee the analysis and its powers, scope, and responsibilities. So designates designates its power, scopes, and responsibilities, if you're following the grammatical
Yeah,
phrasing of it.
yeah, to me, that's a lot more
Yeah.
clear. Yeah.
So, are you okay with that as a second? Yes.
Yes, I support the second.
Next time we should have Google Docs open so we can type this out on the screen.
Well, that's what we gotta meet in the cool room over there. So
Yeah,
we
the
can
cool
get the screen
room.
going and, yeah.
we usually, the HRC doesn't often have these deep dives into this type of subject. So I can understand if we do more in the future that staff will write it up like the city clerk's office does. But it will certainly be correct in any official minutes of the meeting.
I don't wanna overdo the minutia, but,
Go for it.
technically, the city council authorizes the study, not the staff. Is that accurate?
The ordinance would authorize the study.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and staff would be drafting the
yeah,
ordinance.
so I just wanna make
Draft an
sure.
ordinance, that,
Draft
draft an
the
ordinance,
ordinance.
that,
Yeah, okay.
and 1 and 2 is what the ordinance would say.
Yeah. No, I think we're good grammatically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Can I call for a vote? Is there anybody else who would like to speak? Would you like to?
I'm good, I support, whatever you guys are comfortable. I think it's a very good initiative, and it will look very bad if we don't, if it does not pass today.
But we want to make it better.
Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Got unanimous.
So I just wanted to thank everyone who came out. This is obviously one of the first steps, so I hope I can count on your support moving forward. Obviously, council still has to approve this, so I'll be calling upon all of you to help us move that forward.
And before we, I'll ask you to exit quietly because we're running late and I want to catch us up. But I have one more comment on agenda item. I just wanted to thank Commissioner Lee for his passion and energy and diligence in getting us this so far. We spent a lot of time, and I continue to be the loyal opposition. I think we can move through agenda item 2 quickly. If you can hang in just a little bit longer, please, Commissioner Onan. I do have a request to end our meeting promptly, but I would like to get to agenda item 2. And then we can see how we feel from that. Speaker cards. Did you want them? Liz Ratner, and she's left.
Can we just take a real quick break so Vice Chair can have a bio moment?
Yeah, that would be great.
I'm not feeling too bad. I think the cookies have, they're better than candy.
Agenda item 2, consideration of the updated recommendations in relation to the Council Resolution 9653, which is, again, reaffirming Palo Alto's commitment to a diverse, supportive, inclusive, and protective community. Just give you some background on what we're doing and what I'm asking here. We have 2 council dates.
No, I released the one.
Oh, okay.
So we're just. Sorry. At one point, we had talked about, because we didn't know when we'd have all these recommendations of going forward with an information report. We talked about this at our last meeting, and then coming forward with the recommendations. But since we knew this discussion was happening tonight, we are going forward with the recommendations based on your vote on this on April 2nd. So there's only the one council.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. But I wanted to be able to communicate to council the breadth of the work that we have done this summer, the research that we did into the different programs, and how we are now responding to their council resolution. And I also wanted to identify a capacity constraint, that to do everything that we set out to do, we as a commission of 6, hopefully soon 7, have capacity constraints, but we are certainly making demands on our staff. So that was one objective of this piece, and the other objective was to just reinforce the immigration resolutions that we will ask council to agree to. Just as a reminder, we had initially, as a resolution subcommittee, said we would monitor the progress on immigration and ask the council to confirm with the city attorney that all of our code was consistent with the legislation that's passed at the California State Senate level. And then we thought that the city attorney could advise us, and so we could have a stronger recommendation to council. But that is taking so long that it seemed like it was better to go back to Plan A and take it to council. You've seen these recommendations before, but I'll just reiterate what we want to do in our work plan is to ask council to refer SB 54 to the city attorney to make sure that all of our policies and procedures are consistent with SB 54. Also added sending a letter of endorsement to the state senate, to the author, and that was the recommendation of our county supervisor, that having sat in that seat, he particularly appreciated having letters of support from the different jurisdictions, and endorse a resolution in support of refugee resettlement, and that is a vote we've already taken. And so it's included in here as the package that I'd like to send to council. I think we've done a lot of deep dives into the work of the council, following up the council's recommendation or the resolution to us. They ask us for implementations. We have shown on the table here this we have been using as our work plan, that we have policies that we need approval. the programs that we're starting, and we'll be talking about them in Agenda Item 3, and some things that staff is doing on its own with other departments and with other staff within their department. When we do go to council on the 2nd of April, the staff will better be able to itemize their demands on their time, and they will include in their report a resource impact statement that will flesh this out. I think the rest of this we have seen several times, and so I would just like to ask if I can have a vote that we take this to council on the 2nd.
So the actual vote is on the last page. And maybe you want to read that out or make some modifications to it, but just so we have some clarity as far as the motion that is being made, Chair Stinger.
Okay, thank you. It's a good suggestion.
Just the specificity would be something that speaks more. The HRC recommends that the City Council, support the work as brought forth in the resolution, or just there's people out there among you that maybe could wordsmith this a little bit more, but I think it should be a little more specific as far as that this is a response to Council Resolution 9653.
Okay. Let me also say that this work plan was intended to be our first pass. We wanted to do things that we thought were actionable within a certain time frame, and that is all in our text.
And I think what staff will include in the report going forth, the council, and I'd have to look if it's in here, but the work of the resolution is really almost the calling card of the HRC of what issues that you are called to be looking out for in the community. So I think it would be good for the council to know. So these are specific recommendations you have. These are things that staff is committed to doing, and these are things that the HRC is committed to doing. And they are responding specifically to this resolution, but the HRC has and will continue to keep these matters as part of the scope of the work that you have been doing and will continue to do.
Yeah, I think that that's very well said. I don't think that there was anything in Resolution 9653 that was radical, and we meant it to be. And I think we even said that we were reiterating, we were reinforcing values that have been explicit or implicit in Palo Alto, and some have been implicit or explicit purview of this commission. In my view, the really important part of that motion that night, or half the important part that's relevant for you, was that Part B, again, which I read earlier and won't repeat all of, but that it was. We wanted to really task the HRC, give big homework to the HRC with no timeline, with no sunset, to bring to us recommendations for implementation measures and additional elements that should be considered. And I think we do hope as a council that the HRC will continue to refer back to this resolution, and as recommendations occur to the HRC, that you will continue to bring recommendations like the one you just passed, relevant to the various areas mentioned, recommendations for implementation measures, or recommendations for, as I mentioned earlier, the parts that we missed, the things we forgot. So we really hope that staff and the HRC will continue to feel empowered by that resolution to be proactive and to bring recommendations to us. Some of our boards and commissions more regularly bring recommendations to us. HRC does a lot of programmatic activities beyond what a lot of other boards and commissions do. But we hope you'll continue to feel empowered to bring policy recommendations to us, like the one you just passed.
And I want to echo just what you said, Council Member. I think that the difference when the HRC looked at this is, wow, we can do a lot ourselves. We don't want to burden the council with 25, 30 recommendations, and I think there's a difference.
We want that burden.
I know. I think there's a difference of opinion there, but they also wanted to show the council that says, you know, we are willing to, you know, help carry this load in things that we specifically have done and will continue to do. So on the HRC's behalf, just to let you know, it wasn't, well, let's just do a response light. It was more, no, let's look, you know, what staff can do. Let's look what we as a commission can do, and let's give them a first pass in these certain areas, and they certainly expect to come back to you on other times as well.
And I would be hard pressed to put up a count, but we looked through hundreds and picked what we thought we could do in the first year to be actionable and kickstart some things. But yes, we've got a backlog, we've got a database to come back to you. And, thank you. Short hands, I forget to go out there. And I have seen in the last couple months more people approaching me outside of the commission meeting and in commission meetings with ideas, so I hope that our visibility increases. And we will be able to extend the list of population segments that we want to serve. Commissioner Lee.
If I could just make a brief comment. I joined the commission after this resolution was passed and after the commission started working on it. My read on it is that it gives us a broad mandate. It reinforces a broad mandate that we've already had. And so I think moving forward, just given the scope of it, it would be appropriate for the commission as a whole to consider it, as opposed to having one committee composed of only 2 or 3 members covering all of these different areas, because it kind of limits our ability to provide timely feedback to the council under this mandate. So I would hope moving forward that, to the extent that we identify different groups or different topics we want to work on, we can refer that to separate committees, but one committee shouldn't have jurisdiction over that entire resolution.
I think that's the point now. That committee was together to bring it to this point. So the intention was that these issues would not only in the future continue to be discussed by a subcommittee. So an ad hoc subcommittee is ad hoc because it works on a project, it brings it to the body and goes forward.
Okay.
And just to reinforce that, in our work plan, it says the recommendation subcommittee will bring forth the first round of programs and policies. And that was supposed to be completed in Q2, and then we disband because we are an ad hoc committee and cannot continue. So whether we rotate that or decide to do it all as a group, we can decide.
So are we discussing the specific bullet point recommendations here, or are we?
The recommendation, the motion that I'd like to make is this, that the HRC recommends that the City Council support this work plan, which was written in response to Council Resolution 9653. And also that the City Council refer SB 54 to the City Attorney to confirm the city's policies and procedures are consistent with SB 54. Refer SB 31 to the City Attorney to confirm that city's policies and procedures are consistent. And these are elaborated in the table in the text. We ask the City Council to endorse SB 54 endorse SB 31, support a resolution for refugee resettlement, and then I'll use your wording to adopt a CEDAW ordinance, which I didn't have when I wrote this. These are, each of these we've talked about and voted on, but it was the package that I wanted to ask for a vote.
So are you moving that motion?
That's the motion.
So I'll second it, but I have a proposed friendly amendment.
Okay.
So to the first bullet point, after confirm that city policies and procedures are consistent, I propose that we add, and to identify options for additional and complementary policies and procedures that the city could adopt, which curtail the use of city resources in the deportation, and in connection with deportations.
But that's not the job of the city attorney. So the specific recommendation here is to the city attorney, but it wouldn't be the city attorney's job to offer any type of other recommendations. And you could say, and report his findings back to the city council, and then the city council at that point can ask if anything goes further, but the city attorney doesn't, then start coming up with an array of other policies and procedures.
Yeah, and direct staff to identify options for additional and complementary policies and procedures.
And direct whom?
Staff.
The city attorney can't direct staff to do that. I mean,
Referring to SB 54 city attorney to confirm and to direct staff, city council to direct staff to identify options for additional and complementary policies and procedures. I'm saying SB 54 may not be the best we can do. There may be additional steps that we as a city can do, and so I'd like us not only just confirm.
My just comment for identify, that would assume that there would be. I don't know, that's up to the HRC.
I'll comment on that. That was initially part of the immigration package that we were looking at, and I have continued to reach out to the county Office of Immigration, Immigrant Affairs, to ask that same question, because they are more intimately involved in direct communication with the legal side and the aid side and the counseling side. So I would accept the amendment. I think I might ask if the wording would be appropriate, and to direct staff to continually be on the alert, to continually
Identify options for additional and complementary policies for the city's consideration, which curtails use of city resources in connection with deportations.
Would you accept a friendly amendment to make it shorter, to continually?
To identify options for additional and complementary policies and procedures, period.
I'm sorry, what in complementary?
To identify options for additional and complementary policies and procedures that could be implemented by the city.
I would accept that.
And presumably that would refer to the topic of SB 54, but we don't need to say that.
So we have refer SB 54. The bullets under the recommendation are to refer SB 54 to the city attorney to confirm that the city's policies and procedures are consistent, and to direct staff to continually identify options for additional and complementary procedures?
Policies and procedures.
There's a motion and a second and a friendly amendment accepted. Is there any deliberation?
I'm not wild about the addition it's not clear which staff and not clear which types of policies. I personally like things to be more clear and specific when we refer to council. The original bullet point was very clear and very specific, and then I think it kind of wanders a little bit. And also, the city attorney's office is super backed up. It takes a really long time to get any kind of response, and I feel like if we keep adding on, it's going to take even longer.
I was going to say the same exact thing, that staff isn't some blob that you just can say, do this, do this, do this, and then get something out. In fact, we're losing staff in City of Palo Alto. Actually, I have a bigger concern about that, frankly, that every month or two I read about a city staff member leaving the city, and I'm sure part of it is burnout. Look, obviously, I think it's not a bad amendment. I just, we just spent hours sending staff with a lot of homework to do, and now we're sending more, and we're one commission out of, I don't know how many. Like, I just want us to have in the back of our mind that this is, staff as human beings who have to sit on a computer, who have to do research, who have to write things, who have to respond to constituents, who have to respond to city council, we have to have them in the back of our mind.
So I guess my response to that is, again, I think what we're charged with doing is, if we believe that we should be doing something, we make that recommendation to council, and council will weigh those resource issues with staff. I think it's beyond our mandate to take those particular considerations in mind, and it's beyond our time to do so.
I would agree with that. I'd like to speak to that. But I think it's also an obligation to be judicious. And since the first responsibility for that action was with the HRC, we could leave that as our responsibility to continue to monitor what the county is seeing in other cities.
My sense is that the city attorney is going to already do the work of ensuring that existing policies are consistent with state law. So really, what I would like the city to do is to take that next step and identify additional ways that we can be a leader on this issue. Because just confirming that existing policies and procedures are consistent with state law, which they're probably under an obligation to do anyways, doesn't add much to what I imagine they're already doing.
Just gives.
Other than it's a profound statement of saying we've confirmed that, yes, indeed, we are following state law.
And in this environment, I think that visibility is important.
Sure.
Any other?
And I think it's important, while it's important for us to have symbols and to make that clear, I think what council is seeking from us are additional concrete steps that we can take. And so I think that's what my friendly amendment seeks to do.
But to your point, Commissioner Lee, you're not giving specific steps. You're saying staff in general should find in general policies that are in general complementary, which is really hard to understand exactly what that means. It would be much more helpful to say, and direct staff to maintain a relationship with the County Office of Immigration and do quarterly checks to ensure. We need.
Okay, I could make it specific and say, reach out to the County of San Francisco and adopt everything that they've done. I think they are, quite frankly, leaders on all of these issues. They were 10 years ahead of us on CEDAW. So if it was up to me, I'd say keep in touch with San Francisco and find out what they are doing to push the envelope.
Right, but San Francisco's a much bigger city. Yeah, it's a different city.
Sure, but there are certainly lessons to be learned from what they are doing.
And I guess I would go back and look at I don't want to use San Francisco as an example. The CEDAW, their experience was that they were too aggressive and they had to slow down. So I want to keep this for Palo Alto's discussion. And I've accepted the friendly amendment. I'd like to call for the vote.
Could you read it? I'm sorry.
So
Read
I
it back
just
to us.
wanted to.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say for the refugee resettlement, is it okay if I don't vote yes or no? I would like to not vote on a portion of the motion. I can support the.
That motion has already been passed by the HRC. This
Okay.
motion is just to include it in going forward to council, but that decision was made back in September?
Or October.
October, November,
And it was
at a meeting that you may not have been at, but that has our,
You were. I think it was unanimous, or pretty close.
Okay.
so yeah.
You've seen that already.
So I think it would be helpful to reread it.
Yeah, please read
So
it.
then, at this point, since it has a second, then you either have to up or down on the way it's specifically written. And at that point, you can go forward with changing it. Go ahead.
Sorry to throw a monkey wrench into things, but I think it's fine to pass it however you want, but I think Commissioner Onan actually made a good point, which is, we were really looking to the HRC to make recommendations, and simply asking staff to look for recommendations. It may be good practice, and maybe that is, if the idea is that your recommendation is that we set a standard practice in the city of always being on the lookout for new best practices, I think that's okay. But to the degree that the HRC can offer, be very clear, this is a new practice, a new policy, a new procedure, which we recommend City Council consider. I think that's more to the point of the original intent.
I'll read the motion. The HRC recommends that the City Council support this work plan prepared in response to Council Resolution 9653, and recommends that the City Council refers SB 54 to the City Attorney to confirm that the city policies and procedures are consistent, and to direct staff to continually identify options for additional and complementary policies and procedures. Referring SB 31 to the City Attorney to confirm that city policies and procedures are consistent with SB 31. Endorses SB 54, and that would be, endorses SB 31. Supports a resolution for refugee resettlement, and adopts a CEDAW ordinance. I'll put in the proper text.
I just have a question about this. So it's endorsing, there are two SB 51 and it's 31. Can we just put one sentence, endorse this and that? SB 51, SB 31. Is there any reason to separate into two bullets?
Unless I don't think that would be the case in this matter, but by separating allows the council to make a decision on one and not the other.
All right, okay, got it. I'd like to call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Can I, not vote?
You can abstain.
Yeah, I would like to abstain.
Okay.
And I vote no. I really don't like the add-on to the first bullet.
So I'm confused by the votes
I
now.
think the first bullet wasn't the add-on.
Yeah, it was to direct them to find
Did you-
complementary
I think it
policies.
was.
Microphones.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. It's late. The cookies are wearing off. I just didn't like the add-on to the first bullet about directing staff to find the complementary.
I think at this point, staff would like to see who voted yes, who voted no, and who abstained. So to the specific way in which it was read, who voted yes?
Aye.
1, 2, 3.
Bless the chair.
No, I voted against after I heard the argument about the demands on staff, I changed my vote.
So who made the motion
no,
then?
I'll
But you
actually
made the
change.
motion though, right?
I accepted your friendly
Sorry.
amendment.
You know.
But you voted against your own?
Shall
Wait,
we-
I'm a little confused now.
I was convinced by your argument.
But then I think you
Commissioner.
wouldn't accept the friendly amendment then. Then you would not be in favor of Commissioner Lee's friendly amendment.
So I can withdraw.
You can withdraw your support of
Oh.
it, and then there's not a second to the motion. So then we have to find another motion, get a second, discuss, and have a vote.
My apologies, I did not realize that I
well-
could withdraw
So-
my
so-
second.
Microphone.
Well, actually, or she could just withdraw her support for the amendment, and then the motion would stand without the amendment.
That's
unless
true. Thank you.
Unless the proposer of the amendment
Withdraws
offers
my
it as an
second.
unfriendly amendment, in which case another commissioner could second it if they support it.
This is like Game of Thrones.
Could you maybe undo everything, and I would propose something that I think people might.
Undo everything, because I'm confused.
Do you want to withdraw your motion?
I withdraw my acceptance of the second with
Okay.
apologies.
So I would move the recommendation as is, but I would add a bullet point saying, directing the, establishing a HRC ad hoc committee to identify options for additional and complementary policies and procedures that complement SB 54.
But that doesn't need to be part of that motion because this is a motion to council. And council does not have to approve an ad hoc
Okay,
city HRC
okay.
commission.
So I'll make that as a second motion later on.
You can.
Okay, so I move the recommendation as written.
See, we've had a motion and a second.
No, who's this? We don't have a second for the second one. Are you?
I move.
I'll
Do you
second.
Okay.
Can you repeat the motion again?
I
It's
move
as
the
written.
recommendation as written.
As it is, as written here.
That is correct.
And did you guys want to add that thing about explicit reference to 9653?
Yes.
Did read it that way.
she read it that
So
way.
you're right, it was as
Okay.
read.
Okay.
As read. Can we say as read?
I move the recommendation as written with the addition of a reference to, what number is it?
9653.
53.
I second. And if there is no discussion, I will call the vote. All in favor?
Aye. And I'd like to make a second motion.
Any opposed?
Opposed?
Any abstain?
I abstain, yes.
Okay.
4-0. The motion is carried. We will go
1, 2,
to.
3, 4, 5.
It's 501.
5, 0, 1. 0 against and 1 abstain.
It is, where are those cookies? I think you started a comment once about knowing how to count to 5. I clearly don't.
So I'd like to make a second motion to set up an HRC ad hoc committee to identify whether there are any potential additional or complementary policies and procedures that could be adopted by the city that complement SB 54.
But are we allowed to vote on something if it's not on the agenda?
I mean, it's.
I don't think you need to vote on setting up an ad hoc committee.
And it
You
was-
can just say,
Like the chair can set up an ad hoc committee, or?
I believe so, that, I mean, we set up ad hoc committees for each of these items, and I don't remember that we took a vote on them.
And under monitor SB 54, that was part of what we were looking
Yeah,
at.
who's going to work on this item? So we can continue, the HRC can continue to have a agenda item related to this matter. We can look at having it be specific enough, because it can't just be continual response to the ordinance, to the resolution, because that would not be specific enough for the public to be able to come in and give comments. So as we're doing agenda planning, if that's something that someone would like to recommend, as with all recommendations, it needs a second, and then the leadership looks into agendizing that when it fits on the agenda, or when, we have the information that we need in order to have a productive conversation on the matter.
Thank you. Can we, how are we doing? Can we quickly go through agenda item 3, which is a quick update on our different projects?
Okay, I'll give you 5 more minutes.
Okay.
Project first.
Yeah, right.
I would like to, I'm going to change my position. If we have 5 minutes, I'd like to suggest that we do agenda items 4 and 5, and quickly do reports from officials and the input for next month's agenda. And we will defer the status update unless there is something that, is there a
I think I'd like to just give a quick LGBTQ listening
Great.
forum update, just to make sure everyone knows about it.
Okay.
And then whatever else we want to do. So my colleagues on the commission may be aware that we are working with the County Office of LGBTQ Affairs. They are a relatively new office, and they are trying to touch base with all the cities in Santa Clara County, and particularly want to make their presence better known here in the North County, where we're often a bit disconnected from county services. They did a listening forum recently in Mountain View. I attended and Chair Stinger attended. It was a really good event. They reached out to the LGBTQ community, and many agencies that work with that community were there. The purpose was to introduce the mission and work of the county office, but also to listen to what the concerns of the community are and what barriers to services they feel exist. The idea being that the city would like to work better with that community to support them in feeling safe, welcome, included, and able to fully participate. We were very inspired by that, and we are going to do our own Palo Alto LGBTQ listening forum on March 29th, which is Medi's birthday, in the Mitchell Park Community Center from 7 to 9 in the evening. We are now lining up speakers. We have a straw man commitment from Joe Simidian that he'll at least come kick off the event for us, although he has another conflict later on that night. We're going to invite council members, the mayor, the vice mayor, and so forth to attend. We're going to talk to law enforcement to be there to also speak, and we hope to get a good crowd of both LGBTQ members, their families, their friends, allies, and agencies that serve them. So I hope that my fellow commissioners will make some time on their calendars to come by and support that event. This is one of the first times we've reached out directly to that community, and so it feels very timely.
So the flyer is just finished, so staff can send that out ASAP. But we needed to have confirmation from our partners as to the flyer and the program.
You said March 29th?
Yes. It's a
In the evening?
Thursday, 7 to 9. Yeah. Thank you.
Is it in the evening?
In 7 to 9.
Okay.
7 to 9 p.m., Mitchell Park Community Center, Palo Alto room, the large room.
I'm excited about the event, and I'm excited about collaborating with the county to give a North County voice to some of the programs that they're instituting. I have found the county to be extremely helpful. As long as we've started this, Commissioner Chen, do you have any updates?
No, I don't want to say it is too long. I mean, I'm half asleep.
Okay.
I'm finished now.
Commissioner Brumbaugh?
Yeah, I can defer for next time.
Okay. I would like to focus on that. Assignment of liaisons is on the agenda. Commissioner Lee has asked if we could, the Project Safety Net meets during the afternoon, during his workday, which is outside of Palo Alto.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see if we can have somebody step up to be the liaison to Project Safety Net.
So fourth Thursday every month, 3:30 to 5:30, Rinconada Library, fourth Thursday. And I don't think it's like you have to be there every time. I think this is liaison is a commitment by the HRC to be involved in an issue. So, you come as often as you are able to for the liaison relationship that you have.
If I hear no volunteers, I will make some offline calls to make sure that we support the the youth, the high school youth in our community. Well,
You can always have a liaison and an alternate, so.
I think we have the alternate, don't we?
Yeah, I'm the alternate. Yeah, we're looking for another person to be there.
So I will be reaching out to people. Agenda item 5 is our HISRAP site visits. HISRAP is a every other year budget assessment. In the off year, this year, we do site visits. Usually people pick 2 agencies that they'd like to know more about. It's not an audit, be really clear. It's a chance to become more familiar with the agencies so that when they make a proposal, you understand it better.
So this is like, you can go by yourself, or if 1 or 2 of you want to go together. So this is a sheet that we'll pass around. It's just in the next couple months, and staff would do an email, either give you the email address of our contact, or excuse me, or staff will do an email introduction for you. So the purpose is, again, as the chair said, just to, say thanks for what you do. You go, you get a little tour of their site and their programs and so forth. It's not to say, can you show me the books or anything like that. So this is just, we're hoping that each commissioner can at least go to at least 1 or 2 agencies.
What is their general availability? Is it going to be during the workday? Like, would we have to take time off to go visit them, or are they available in the evenings or weekends?
Some are available in the evenings. For example, Dreamcatchers has tutorials as their, that you can go and actually see the tutors working with the kids and get a tour of their facility. So it will kind of depend on the nature of the agency.
So often, what we did last year is someone was happy to designate themselves as the lead. So then, if you two say you want to go to Dreamcatchers and Commissioner Lee says I'll be the lead, then you'll find out your fellow commissioners' time availability, and you'd get in touch with the agency and handle the communications between the 2 of you. So if you want to, if you're willing to play that role, if next to your name you could just put an L. It's a lot of fun.
I would like to look up and figure out which ones I would be interested in. I mean, I cannot
Okay.
sign on the
Well, why don't we ask people that can sign up, and we can distribute this via email as well.
Commissioner reports?
I have been in a lot of functions. So, Dreamcatcher. The one way to find out is to drop in, so they're not prepared for you, and then find out the real thing. So that's the way to do it, right? Right, pop test.
So you're torturing our recipients.
No, I'm just saying. Well, I went to their Christmas party.
Okay.
And then I talked to the tutors, I talked to the students' parents, and it was a very good crowd. And then it was a very good meeting, finding out what they're doing. And it's very impressive. I think they've done a very good job.
I missed you. I must have gone after you.
Well, I was there now and waited for you in there. I even brought food I didn't eat.
I'd also like to share that Commissioner Chen and I, about a year and a half ago, attended the first Adolescent Wellness Conference, which was held down by the airport, and it was a very good conference. So they are redoing it. It's going to be every other year. This year it's going to be down in Santa Clara. So we're going to split the duties, and Commissioner Chen will be going on the Friday session. I'll be attending the Saturday session. So we'll be reporting back to the commission on that.
And I attended a meeting of the county age-friendly. You heard a report from Generations United about intergenerational activities. It was very interesting, and one of the things that she particularly talked about that was very, go ahead, take it. That was very interesting, and maybe the topic for next quarter's meeting is senior, or mixed age, there's a better word for it, shared housing, senior and younger people housing, as a way to help seniors and help students who need access to more affordable housing. So we'll be pursuing that. And the other commissioner report is welcome to our council liaison. Thank you. We're happy to have you here. Any reports for us?
Good to be back, and I just want to say thanks for your, I think, very good discussion, deliberation on the CEDAW stuff. Sorry to weigh in so much, but I think you got to a really good conclusion. The amendments improved it, and I look forward to further policy recommendations from this commission in pursuit of your mandate as it fits into the city's broader visions. Thanks.
I think the only thing I was going to report was another event, which is at the end of March, the night before the LGBT event, is the Age-Friendly Committee, in collaboration with the Alzheimer's Association, is having a dementia awareness event. Same place, Mitchell Park Community Center. Mary and I maybe will camp out and stay there for the second night, but that event is 7 to 9, and that event is to give information about Alzheimer's and other dementia-related issues, and give the members of the public resources in order to best interface with friends, neighbors, loved ones with Alzheimer's. And Mayor Niz will be kicking off that event, as she is very dedicated to the issue of Alzheimer's awareness and dementia awareness.
March meeting. Other agenda items?
Wanted to ask if the leadership team had considered the agenda item that myself and Commissioner Blumbeck had requested via email regarding a follow-up to the RV presentation we were previously provided by staff.
In terms of the February meeting, we had not heard back from the city attorney, and I thought we had a full agenda.
So, I mean, is it on the March agenda, or?
You can certainly suggest it, yeah.
Okay, can I make a recommendation that we add it to the March agenda?
Please.
You cannot make a recommendation that's specifically on the March agenda. You can make a recommendation that you'd like to see it on an agenda, and then staff and leadership will put it on the agenda at the soonest possible meeting.
Can the commission vote to put something on a specific agenda?
I've not heard that to be specifically the case. So it was moved and seconded.
Yeah.
So definitely it will be on an agenda. My point is, unless we have the information to properly discuss it, I just don't want to have a discussion without the benefits of the questions that you have framed that you want to talk.
Okay.
So just to talk about it, to say, I want it on the agenda, we haven't heard from the city attorney, so it's a conversation in a void as well.
Sure. Could we get a timeline from the city attorney as to when they think they can get around to answering the question?
I can request that.
I mean, typically, I'm not expecting them to answer right away, but like ETA would be, I think, appreciated.
Okay,
I mean, so it just doesn't fall into limbo forever.
I understand.
Even if it's like, they say 5 months from now, at least it gives us a sense of when they'll get around to it.
I've had a request from Abilities United to give us a presentation. I guess they have some new programs, and they would like to.
Yeah.
I just am going to list that. I don't know what our capacity is for presentations in March, because I would like to refine our presentation to council on April 2nd.
Need to get a second for that.
Yeah, I second that.
Okay.
My son used the Abilities United swimming program. It's a very good program overall, and the staff and the people there are awesome.
Great. And the other piece that I asked for was a refinement of our presentation to council on April 2nd. We are.
Yes, you're going, yes. So I think the HRC can talk about, I mean, staff will be writing that report, so that report is not going to be reviewed, by the HRC before it goes to council. I mean, if the HRC wants to discuss, okay, who's going to be there, you know, what are some of the key points, you know, we like to make, you know, and so forth. But staff will give a presentation. It will be a staff report, but I definitely see that the HRC would be there and to be able to sit with staff to speak to your recommendations.
Yeah, because I think April 2nd is spring break week, right? For the
I don't know what to say. It's very hard to get on a council agenda. I think if you're not on that one, it would get pushed back. So I can sympathize so that, you know, the HRC can make a decision that it doesn't want that date, and staff can look for another one. But all the commissioners are not required to be there, but if the HRC doesn't feel like that's a date that would work, staff would have to go back and request another date. And to see another date that could be requested.
Yeah, I think I'm the only one with the school-going children. I think Medis are still babies, right?
Does April 2nd affect you at all? We should talk about the day of the HRC or the council meeting?
The council meeting.
Okay. The other thing that we had mentioned was an update from Healthy Cities, Healthy Communities. If we wanted to discuss their initiatives on community to see if there were any that we were particularly interested in.
Okay, so
I'm just trying to go over the things that we've, that have come to us in the past, and I wouldn't prioritize that, but I don't want to lose it from the list.
Right, and staff could also see if that was the direction from, you know, that committee that wanted to give a presentation to the HRC.
Thank you for your endurance. Thank you for staying. And the meeting is adjourned. Oh, no. Get your phone, Minka.